the date for the Battle of Raphia was 217 BC. And of course, that's yet future. And the date for the Battle of Panium, if I have it easily available, I'm not seeing it, but I should. Pardon me? I don't.
Panium?
Yeah, Panium.
198?
198?
198 or 200, some sources say.
Okay.
I thought you guys picked 198 for some reason.
Yeah, there was two choices. The historians are unclear, and one equated to a 19-year difference and the other. So anyway, verse 13 through 15, 198 we'll put. You need to check that out if it's important to be clear on that date. This is Raphia. This is Panium. And then we get into a second witness. Well, no. Let's do verse 15 one more time and make a point here. In verse 15, a different point. Daniel 11, verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mound and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. The king of the south is here defeated in history. And one of the things that this verse identifies is that there's a chosen people that are associated with the king of the south. And they're not willing to stop this battle either, this battle of Panium. Okay, so this is first clue that the king of the south has an ally here, whoever his chosen people are at the end of the world. I would suggest that they're Islam. And if you're going to consider the beginning of the warfare against the king of the north and the king of the south in the terms of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, you have this 10-year war of Afghanistan, begins in 1979, ends in 1989. And in that history, the United States is propping up Islam against Russia. But Jesus illustrates the end with the beginning. So when you come to the final battle of the king of the south and the king of the north, the United States against Russia, here Russia has an ally. The United States has many allies because the previous verses says many shall stand up against the king of the south. The United States is putting together a world alliance against Russia. And if we come to understand that the proxy war that's going on in Syria at the current time is this proxy war that is going to reach its conclusion at the midnight cry at the Battle of Panium, then it's interesting to note that Russia entered the Syrian war in 2015, and they brought into the Syrian war Iranian troops to work with them, Russia did, and they did so on September 11th, 2015. Okay, which, if September 11th means anything to you, that's kind of provocative, that on September 11th, 2015, Russia has just come into Syria. On the 11th, the Iranian troops arrived there. Okay, so whether it's Islam or not, there's obviously an ally with the king of the south when he goes down, because his chosen people cannot prevent this from taking place. Now notice verse 16. It says, "But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will." Here is a grammatical thing again that I'm going to ask you about. In verse 16, verse 15 is just shown the king of the north ending the king of the south. Okay, and then verse 16 says, "But he that cometh against him," who is the him? It'd be the king of the north of the previous verse. Verse 16 is saying that there is a power now that's going to come against the king of the north. There's a power in verse 16 that's going to come against the United States. Do you see that grammatically? My brother Brian, do you see that? I'm wanting you to see that so we can move on.
No, we can move on.
Were you following along or were you somewhere else?
No, I'm following.
Okay.
I think if we showed or the he in the first part of that verse is Rome, people Rome,
Papacy.
the papacy.
Well,
The papacy that cometh against.
but in the history, when the history was fulfilled, as the pioneers would apply it, it was pagan Rome coming against him in that history. And you're making the accurate end time application of saying that it's papal Rome at the end of the world. That's where I'm going. I just want them to see who's who here so that we can identify that pagan Rome and the original application is typifying modern Rome in our history. You're absolutely right. It's saying that here in verse 16, the United States, the king of the north, has just defeated Russia in verse 15. And then verse 16 says, but the power that's going to come against the king of the north, against the United States, here in verse 16, no one's going to stand in his way. Okay, so verse 16 says, but he that cometh against him, against the United States, modern Rome, the papacy, shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land. Where's the glorious land? United States. When does the papacy stand in the glorious hand? Verse 41. Verse 16 is verse 41. We said that earlier. This is the logic now that you can see it. Which by his hand shall be consumed. What's that telling you about the glory, the conquering of the glorious land in the hand? The papacy stretches out its hand, and the United States clasps its hand, and at the same time, God's faithful children, the 11th hour workers that are in the communion of Babylon, that are still in the communion of Babylon at the Sunday law in the United States. Sister White is clear that Revelation 18:4 is the Sunday law in the United States. And in Revelation 18:4 it says, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. So at the Sunday law in the United States, there is a call for God's people that are in Babylon to come out of her. And in verse 41 of Daniel 11, when the king of the north, the papacy, conquers the glorious land, as typified and identified in verse 16, when it stands in the glorious land, there's going to be a threefold group of people that escape the papacy's hand. And that word escape means escape is by slipperiness, and the essential understanding of that Hebrew word is whatever escapes out of the hand has previously been in the hand of the papacy. That's why I use the illustration about a bar of soap in a tub of water. The papacies had these people under their control, and they're identified as Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Modern Babylon is divided into three parts. The Sunday law in the United States, come out of Babylon. Come out of Babylon, my people. So while the papacy in verse 16 is destroying, consuming, ending the United States as the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy, the faithful Seventh-day Adventists that are being lifted up as an ensign at this point in time are calling the 11th hour workers out of Babylon. So verse 16, we already have it up here, is verse 41. And verse 16, back to Daniel 11, verse 16. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of woman, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. After this he shall turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. So 2 points here. First point is that verse 17 is now talking about not when pagan Rome conquers the glorious land in that ancient history, but when they conquer the third obstacle that they have to deal with, and that's Egypt. And that's Daniel 11, verse 42 and 43. Okay, so verse 17, how would we do this? Verse 42 and 43, Egypt, that's verse 17. But now you've got a couple stories going here. Because in verse 16, it's Pompey that comes in the glorious land. And verse 17, it's Julius Caesar that's doing his thing. And verse 19, Julius Caesar is assassinated by Brutus. And in verse 20, after Julius Caesar, you have Augustus Caesar standing up, a raiser of taxes in the glory of his kingdom. And Obama is this third president. Pompey is Clinton. Julius Caesar is Bush II. Here, Augustus Caesar is the raiser of taxes in the glory of his kingdom. The height of the Democratic Party of liberalism in the United States was the presidency of Obama, and they're not going to get another chance because Trump is the last president. So the agenda of liberalism in the United States reaches its height during the presidency of Obama, and that was the glory of the kingdom, or that's what the glory of Augustus Caesar's kingdom is represented. When they talk about the Augustinian age, they're talking about Augustus Caesar, the height of the Roman Empire. And if time would last, and it won't, liberalism would point to Obama as the premier champion of liberalism. And then in verse 21 it says, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, Tiberius Caesar, the fourth ruler, typifying Trump. This Hebrew word vile means despised. Okay, Trump obviously despised. To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. Are they given the honor of the presidency to Trump? Okay, whoever they are, they're not doing it in our history. But he shall come in peaceably, and this is one of the things you have to see. In fact, this is why you got to run through these four presidents. We could pass over them quickly, but you need to see that Tiberius Caesar comes in peaceably. This is one of the characteristics of Trump. And obtain the kingdom by flatteries, and with arms of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. In the reign of Tiberius Caesar, the prince of the covenant, Christ is crucified. Okay, so this places this Roman ruler, Tiberius, the fourth in this sequence, Pompey, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and Tiberius. And it places Tiberius at the time of the cross, and the cross typifies the Sunday law. So Trump, the fourth president in the sequence of presidents, is the president that's still reigning at the Sunday law. Okay, so I'm thinking that when you take Abraham Lincoln, one of the characteristics of Abraham Lincoln is that he was assassinated. He's the first Republican president. Trump's the last Republican president. So I don't think it's teaching that Trump's going to be assassinated. I think that Trump, as the representative of the United States, is going to be there at the Sunday law. And that's where the United States comes to its end. And the United States is going to be conquered by Rome. And anyone that is a thorough student of history knows that it was the Jesuits of Rome that assassinated Abraham Lincoln. So here, the whole country is coming to its conclusion, and that element of Abraham Lincoln is being typified in Trump. But he's going to continue on as Ahab, the premier king of the 10 kings in the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy, and he begins his consolidation of power in between Raphia and Peniam. Okay, there's even evidence, if we get into the other verses in detail, which we will not do because of time, the buildup, the military and economic buildup in the United States is marked in Daniel 11 as beginning before the Battle of Raphia. Okay, you can bring evidence to bear from the Battle of Actium, which is in this story, that both Augustus Caesar and Mark Antony were preparing long before these battles were underway. So we see that, right? You see that even though the Democrats are saying in this budget agreement that was passed this last week that they got what they wanted and this was a failure for Trump, if you listen to the other side of the story, he got a lot of stuff for the military that they weren't expecting him to get. He's doing the work of building the military. And many of his cabinet members are military guys. I wonder why that is. And a sister was in here that left, and she pointed out that Trump's son-in-law and daughter, Trump's son-in-law is Jew, keeps the Sabbath, and his wife converted to Judaism to marry him. So he's got a couple Sabbath keepers there, but he also has who? Ben Carson. And why isn't Ben Carson the Secretary of Health or whatever they call it. Okay, he's a world-class doctor, physician. He should be the one running the cabinet post on medicine, but he's not. He's the one that's running the cabinet post on housing and urban development, because in this very same history, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is going to fulfill the Omega apostasy, which includes the Adventist Church going into the cities and doing a wonderful work, and the Omega apostasy has been typified by the Alpha apostasy, and you can't separate a great physician from the Alpha apostasy. John Harvey Kellogg is the symbol of that apostasy. So when the Omega is fulfilled and the Seventh-day Adventist Church goes into the cities and does the wonderful work, and the cabinet leader of the United States at this time is a well-known Seventh-day Adventist physician, you ask, what kind of wonderful work are they going to do in the cities? And all you have to do is go into the Bible in the spirit of prophecy to realize that, for one that always pops into my mind. Now, I don't know where this is. I don't know the reference to this, but this is almost word for word, if it isn't word for word. She says, oh, that God's people had a sense of the impending destruction of thousands of cities almost wholly given to idolatry. Okay, now so the point about this is, when you read that's out of a passage, and when you read it in context, God's people are to sense this impending destruction while probation is still open. And when does probation close for us as Seventh-day Adventists? Right here at the Sunday Law. Thousands of cities that are given to idolatry. Did you find that quote? Were you looking for that quote?
No, I am.
Look, impending destruction.
Yeah, here it is. All those who should appreciate the value of souls carrying with Christ a burden of heaviness and constant sorrow, mingled with tears for the cities of the earth. The destruction of these cities, almost wholly given up to idolatry, is impending.
That's a different one, but keep reading.
Okay, I'm always getting a different one. In the great day of final reckoning, what answer can be given for neglecting to enter these cities now?
That's a better one. But in the sense that if you followed what she said there,
Instead of delaying?
yeah, she's saying what, at the great day of God, that's when your probation and my probation closes, and we're going to stand before the judgment seat. And what kind of excuse can you and I give for not warning those cities about this impending destruction when we knew about it? So we're required to know about the impending destruction of thousands of cities before probation closes.
Reference?
Good point. 1833.
1833?
No,
Testimonies, Volume 8, page 33. So my point is that national apostasy is followed by national ruin at the Sunday Law. Everyone knows that principle, right? But when is the first Sunday Law?
Midnight.
The Midnight Cry. It's the same principle. Between the Midnight Cry and the Sunday Law is where all this crisis that's going to take place in the United States takes place, because at the Sunday Law in the United States is no longer the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. Its time of probation is past. Now the focus of Bible prophecy is the seventh kingdom. It's the 10 kings that are agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast. So when Sister White talks about a coming civil war in the United States, or despotism, martial law in the United States, or the impending destruction of thousands of cities almost fully given to idolatry, it's got to take place in this history here, which begins at the Midnight Cry. All right, so what we're saying here is the Midnight Cry is represented by Paneum, and that midnight is represented by Raphia. You follow that logic? Okay, because you've got to determine what these two battles are in verses 11 through 15, because verse 16, you know it's real clear, it's the Sunday Law. So these two battles have to be two waymarks. In the pattern of Daniel 11, 40 to 45, they have to be two waymarks that come before the Sunday Law. But there isn't a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south that is marked at 9/11. So the logic is you have to put these two waymarks in between 9/11 and the Sunday Law, and the two waymarks that have already been established are midnight and the Midnight Cry. And they fit, okay? That's why we're putting them there, they fit. So at Paneum, this is where everything comes off the axle. Russia is taken out of history, and Russia is who in this sequence of events? It's the king of the south. So we prepared you earlier for this point in time. Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. When did the king of the south come into history? Because when he goes out of history, you're going to see the same characteristics. The king of the south arrives in history in 1793. Remember? King Louis XVI loses his head. So a kingdom is removed. That's Russia. A new manifestation of the dragon power. A new dragon power is introduced right here at the midnight cry. Who's the new dragon power? This is the rise of the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy. It's the rise of the United Nations. Now this, brothers and sisters, this is also, I don't know if it's a conclusion. I probably better guard my words there.
Can I stop you?
Yeah.
So does that correspond to the rise of the UN with what she says about France being a new manifestation of satanic power in Revelation 8?
What she says,
the two witnesses.
okay, so he's asking the question, when I'm saying a new manifestation of a dragon power here, does that correspond to what Sister White says in the Great Controversy? Because when Sister White in the Great Controversy is commenting on Revelation 11:8, and we can read that just so we're all familiar with it. In Great Controversy, she says this is a new manifestation of a satanic power, but Satan is the dragon, so that qualifies. And when she says it, a new manifestation of a dragon power, I think she says. But naked.
New manifestation of satanic power.
Okay, there you go. Verse 8 says of Revelation 11, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Okay, so this is the French Revolution. This is Sodom and Egypt. And she's commenting on this beast of verse 7 in Great Controversy. And that's in Great Controversy 269, if you want to read it. Great Controversy 269. But in verse 7 it says, before verse 8, and when they have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Sister White will tell us that this is in the French Revolution, there's a new manifestation of a satanic power. And what I'm saying is that new manifestation came in 1793. And that in agreement with that, the crucifixion of the two witnesses that go on in this history, it takes place during the Reign of Terror. Okay, and the Reign of Terror begins in 1793. So my answer is yes, it corresponds to that. But that was at the beginning of the story of the King of the South. This is where the King of the South comes into history, back here in 1793. But at the end of the King of the South, you're going to see those same characteristics. You're going to see a kingdom removed, which in this history is not the royalty of France, the French monarchy. It's going to be the royalty of atheism, communist Russia. And the new manifestation of satanic power is going to be the beginning of the 10 kings that are going to be led by Trump as they come together at the Sunday law and agree to give their kingdom to the papacy for 1 hour. And,
That's the eighth king.
pardon me?
That's the eighth king?
Yeah, the eighth is of the seven. So yes. And I was going to say something, and then I thought better of it. Then you brought up your question, and I can't remember it, so I'm going to pass by. No, it's good. Usually when I'm thinking better of saying it, and I usually go ahead and say it, and then later on I think, oh man, I shouldn't have said it. But I do want to put something else in here that we've already discussed. This being the last war between the king of the north and the king of the south, The first war between the king of the north and the king of the south will typify that. And the first war of the king of the north and the king of the south, modern king of the north and king of the south, took place in 1979 to 1989 in a proxy war. It was carried out in Afghanistan that concluded with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Therefore, it is probable to expect that leading up to this history, there will be a proxy war going on where the USA is in a struggle with Russia. And in the original proxy war back here in 79 to 89, the other player that was involved was Islam. And we're already seeing a proxy war going on in Syria between the USA and Russia. And we're both powers are propping up aspects of Islam. Okay, so it's not too clear on which side to take. But Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, so there's probably going to be some type of proxy war going on that leads to the Battle of Panium. Okay, so moving on, back to Daniel 11. Comments before we take up the next thought? All right, Daniel 11, verse 23. What I'm saying, brothers and sisters, what I want to remind you about what I'm saying here. Verse 5 is a line that shows the threefold conquering that typified the three horns being plucked up in 538. Verse 6 through 9 typifies the history, is fulfilled by the history of 281 to 246 BC, but that history parallels perfectly the history of 538 to 1798. And it follows verse 5, okay? Verse 5, the third horn's plucked up, it takes you to 538. Verses 6 through 9 projects you down to 1798. Okay, verse 10 identifies the retaliation of the king of the north against the king of the south in 1989-91 time period in the war that's in verse 10 from 219 BC. Okay, so what I'm saying is that these verses, either singularly or a few verses together, are representing lines of prophecy. When we get to verse 11 and 12, we have the Battle of Raphia that Russia wins, and then the persecution in Russia that takes place. Then in this line we begin to see a little bit more complexity. You have the military build-up that's going on in this history between midnight and the midnight cry, along with some peace treaties that are being marked in here, and the arrival of the king of the north here into this history. And then in verse 16, you're seeing an introduction of a second witness to the four presidents of verse 2, with Pompey, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and Tiberius. But you're also seeing the conquering of the world by Rome, because you're seeing the three obstacles that Rome had to overcome being overcome. Okay, the first is the east, Syria, then the glorious land in verse 16, and Egypt in verse 17. But in the description of that fourth king, Tiberius, it says that he comes in peaceably. Okay, so when you get to verse 23, you have another line beginning. In verse 23 of Daniel 11, I want to point out, if you go into Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, he's going to tell you, not the way I'm going to tell you, or not in agreement with me, but he's going to tell you just what I'm saying. He's saying that verse 23 now is going to project you backwards in history. Because Uriah Smith's going to tell you that the prince of the covenant in verse 22 is Christ being crucified. And Christ was crucified in 31 AD, and Uriah Smith knew that. And he's going to tell you that verse 23 is the league with the Jews that took place in 161 BC. So verse 23 is going backwards in history 200 years before the cross in verse 22. Okay, that's standard correct understanding. So what Uriah Smith is doing, if you're willing to see it, is he's saying that Daniel 11 are lines of prophecy that have to be rightly divided and placed into the correct historical context. Okay, and this is standard. What's up with you, my sister? Okay, you too. Did I say something that I missed there? No? Okay. I'm embarrassing them now, so I'm not going to get an answer out of them. Forget about it.
Who are you talking to?
Pardon me?
Who are you talking to?
It don't matter. We'll move on. Verse 23 takes us backwards into history, okay? And I'm wanting, and that's the understanding of the pioneers, and Uriah Smith sets it forth, and I want you to see it because that's in agreement with what I'm telling you, is that these 39 verses of Daniel 11 are the perfection of Daniel 11:40 to 45, but they're only brought to perfection when you recognize your responsibility as a student of prophecy to recognize the various historical lines and take those lines and bring them together line upon line using the pattern that is established in Daniel 11:40 to 45. It has to fit in that history. So I'm telling you that the pioneers understood these historical breaks, repeat and enlarge. Okay? Go ahead.
It's interesting in Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith. It says, from this point we are then taken through a direct line of events. That's on verse 23. Just his word.
A direct line.
Page 258.
That's thoughts on Daniel Revelation 258. He's saying something that's accurate, but he didn't know how accurate it was to us here at the end of the world. But it's even more accurate for us than it was for him. Okay, so in verse 23, it says, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Now, okay, so you got to go into this history, and you can read it from Uriah Smith. Why is it that the Jews reach out to Rome to form a league with them? And more than that, it's two questions. Who are the Jews at the end of the world? And who is Rome at the end of the world? Because here in verse 23, they're going to form a league. Okay. Seventh-day Adventists are typified by the Jews. Who's Rome? Us? The United States. Okay, so when is it that Seventh-day Adventists come into some kind of association with the government of the United States? Raphia, at midnight. Okay, Christ is our example in all things. Here the Jews reach out to Rome. This is another place where there's a league with the Jews. This isn't in 161 BC. This is in 31 AD. The Jews reach out to Rome to persecute Christ at midnight. They come and have him arrested. And we're saying the Battle of Raphia is at midnight. So we're saying that verse 23, the league with the Jews, is verse 11. You understand the logic for that? Okay, now you have to ask the second question. Why is it that the Jews reached out to Rome to form a league in 161? Protection from what? Syria. The Syrians were threatening them strongly. They were under pressure from the Syrians. Why is it that we've already discussed that the Seventh-day Adventist Church reaches out to the government of the United States at this waymark? What is threatening them? Persecution. Where's the persecution devolving from? Where's it coming from? What's generating this movement for persecution? Russia. Who said that? You said that, okay. So the Syrian oppression in 161 is typifying the Russian oppression that follows the Battle of Raphia. Now this is a problem for my brother Dave, but it's okay. He'll work through it one way or another. And if he's right, the Lord will allow him to prevail. Amen. But if you haven't grappled with what it's a problem with for him, then you're missing your responsibility, because you need to grapple with this. What you need to grapple with is that I'm telling you now that because of Syrian oppression against the Jews in 161 BC, a league is formed between the Jews and Rome. And I'm saying that's typifying midnight. And that the Syrian oppression would typify the Russian oppression. But who is Syria in the narrative? Who said the king of the south? That's the problem that you need to grapple with. Syria is the king of the north. How is it that I'm telling you that in Daniel 11, at one line, Syria, or that Russia is the king of the south, but at another line, it is the king of the north? So my brother, by context, that's how you do it. But the fact that my brother David is grappling with this, I think it's something that every one of us needs to work through. If you don't see it, if you don't see the apparent inconsistency in what I'm teaching you, then when it creeps up on you in the middle of the night, you're going to think, hey man, that was a bunch of heresy that guy was teaching. I don't want that to happen. I want it to be out front. And my answer is what Sister Kathy just said. It's by context. Okay, so could Russia possibly be the king of the south, and possibly in another line be the king of the north? And I want to throw something at you. Is pagan Rome the king of the north? You're saying yes and no, my brother. Yes, pagan Rome is the king of the north. What did it have to? What's its first? What's the first obstacle it has to conquer? The east. Okay, what's the east in that relationship? When they conquered the east, who were they conquering? Syria. In 168, the Battle of Pidna. Okay, so you got the king of the north conquering the east, but the east is Syria. The east is the king of the north, and sometimes, but in that context, when pagan Rome is taking control of the world in fulfillment of Daniel 8:9, and it's going to conquer the east, the south, and the pleasant land, the east is Syria. It's the last of the Greek kings. So you have the king of the north. If you're going to stick to some of the basic rules, you have the king of the north conquering the king of the north. But it's based upon context. So the first obstacle for pagan Rome was Syria. And I'm saying Syria's oppression against the Jews in 161 BC represents the Russian oppression here at the end of the world after the Battle of Raphia. What was the first obstacle for modern Rome? It was the king of the south. And that was typified by pagan Rome's first obstacle. And what was pagan Rome's first obstacle? Syria. Do you get my point? Based upon context. The context of the line will define where you place the line, and the line can only go in Daniel 11, 40 to 45.
Battle of Pidna was in 168 in Macedonia.
Yeah.
And so Rome conquered the northern Macedonian. Then in 168 it went to Syria and said, you're not going into Egypt. And they put a hold on them. So there wasn't a battle there. And when the treaty came...
When he went into Egypt and put a hold on him, what did he do?
No, he went into Syria, the area of Syria, and said, you're not going into Egypt. In 168, the same year, a different general, the same year, and he put the Syrian general...
Keep it simple, because I have to repeat this.
In check. He put him in check.
How?
Well, there's two times they did it, so I'm forgetting which one. This might be the one where you put the circle.
Yeah, put the circle in town. In Egypt.
It was in Egypt?
Yep.
He said, you're not going any further in then. It was on, wouldn't it be in the border of Egypt?
I thought it was in Egypt, and he said to Antiochus Epiphanes, you decide whether you're going to surrender me or not before you get out of this circle that I've just drawn around it.
I understand he didn't quite get into Egypt then.
But in 168, they take Macedonia and Egypt, and Macedonia is Syria. No?
Macedonia is Greece.
It's Greece.
It's up in Greece. And that's why in 168, that was a different general, I understand that, took that.
Yep, I agree with that.
So a few months later, he's on the border of Egypt, and the Roman general says, you're not going in there, and he draws a circle around, you're gonna make a decision before you come out of that circle, therefore putting it in check.
Okay, it's obvious that you may have a better grasp of that history than me, so I'm going to claim something, and I could be wrong.
So then the treaty comes.
I'm pretty sure he put the circle around Antiochus in Egypt.
Okay, I'm open, but I don't remember that. Then, so in a few years later, BC, the numbers get less, 161. Now you have your treaty. And
Yeah, but that's a different story. The Syrians are not dead yet, and they're bringing grief upon the Jews, so the Jews reach out to the Romans. What you're talking about in 168, what I'm talking about in 168, is when pagan Rome makes its first conquering. And it's that kingdom that is to the east. It's Syria, it's Macedonia, and it included Egypt. In 168, both of those events took place.
I'm trying to comprehend what you're saying. Yeah, I'm just going with it.
Yep. Me too.
Okay.
There is room for growth and understanding on all parties, and all I want us to say in terms of my brother David is that he's made an observation that all of us need to grapple with. Because I am teaching that it's Syrian oppression that forces the Jews to seek a league, or the league with Rome, but that in the Battle of Raphia, the same event is being illustrated. It's from Russia defeating the United States at the Battle of Raphia, and then in verse 12, returning and accomplishing a threatening persecution in Russia that is so severe and so threatening that it leads Seventh-day Adventists in the United States to seek some kind of legal connection with the government of the United States to deal with the troublers in their midst. So on both those lines, you have two powers that are producing this antagonism that creates a league with the Jews. But at one level, it's identifying Russia as the king of the South. And at the other level, it's saying that Russia would be represented by Syria. And I don't have a problem with that based upon applying the lines through the context where they're at, because we're talking about three different histories you and I are talking about. I'm talking about two, but perhaps three. Sister Peggy.
I don't know if this is going to apply or not, but, you know, when a country overcomes or conquers another one, they become the king of the north, king of the south. And while the United States is only the king of the north in association with the papacy, if at Raphia, Russia defeats the United States, would that somehow make Russia kind of like the king of the north because they've defeated the armies of Rome?
I get your logic, but no, it wouldn't, because that takes place in verse 11, and then it's followed by verse 12, and verse 13 says, just, for the king of the north shall return. Okay, that's the king of the north in the previous verses. He's going to return. He's not done yet.
And it's only the first battles. He's defeated them only in the first round. He hasn't
Yeah.
been eliminated.
Yes. Okay, so anyway, I want you to think about this fourth Roman power, Tiberius. Okay? Because in verse 21, he comes in peaceably. And after verse 23, which takes us back to 161 BC, then verse 24 says this: he shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the province. Who is it that enters peaceably? Who is Tiberius? It's Trump. This is verse 24. Okay, what precedes verse 24? Verse 23. Okay, so verse 23 is the league with the Jews. Verse 23 is the Battle of Raphia. You all following me? But in verse 24 now, this fourth president in this narrative, he's going to come in peaceably. And he's going to do something his fathers and his fathers' fathers have not done. Are you following me? So it's after the Battle of Raphia that he's going to come in peaceably. But peaceably is a characteristic of Tiberius, which is typifying Trump. So verse 24 says, he shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and the spoil and the riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So this is Trump, because Tiberius is the one that comes in peaceably, and he's going to do that which his fathers and his fathers' fathers have not done. And I've understood that this is in agreement with the pioneer breakdown of how Rome takes control of the world. How did Rome take control of the world in fulfillment of this verse? Now that's when? How? Okay, he did so by alliances and treaties. Okay, instead of going out and just defeating that country, they entered into alliances with the countries, and they shared the booty that they were winning from the countries that wouldn't form alliances with them. And I'm saying that this is typifying the art of the deal with Donald Trump. And the first thing that Donald Trump did when he was elected president is he, I don't know how they call it, rejected a treaty that had never even been ratified. The Trans-Pacific Treaty, it hadn't even been ratified. It didn't need to be rejected. But he made a statement, I'm rejecting this treaty, because that's his signature element of his character, the art of the deal. He's going to go out to countries and he's going to say, if you'll come into an agreement with me, then we can share the wealth together. That's what Rome did. Unlike the kingdoms that preceded pagan Rome, Greece, Medo-Persia, and Babylon, and Egypt and Assyria, they took control of the world by conquering. But pagan Rome took control of the world, and this is the pioneer testimony and the historical testimony through these treaties and alliances, and we've got a president that's what he's known for, okay? And we've seen him do it from the very start. But what else is he going to do that his fathers and his fathers' fathers have not done? That would be, I would say, the previous 44 presidents. What is he going to do in his presidency that they have not done? Pardon me? Take us into the United Nations? Yes, but he's going to repudiate the Constitution of the United States and enter into a dictatorship. Never been done here before. Got real close with Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, because he did some things during the Civil War that would be pretty worrisome if they were done now, but they've been done and even in World War II with the Japanese. Okay, but what's coming up with Trump is right here at the Midnight Cry, in this history here. The Midnight Cry, brothers and sisters, when they pass the first Sunday law, you're pretty much history in the United States. That's destroyed the Constitution. It's totally gone at the Sunday law, but the Midnight Cry is the first Sunday law, and national apostasy is followed by national ruin. He's going to do something in this history here that his fathers and his fathers' fathers have not done. But here, at the Midnight Cry, this is the battle of Paneum, but it's also the battle of Actium. Okay, because in verse 24, when it says that he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time, this time is marked by the pioneers as the history of 31 BC. I'm going to do it the right way. I haven't done it the right way ever, probably. 31 to 30 BC to 329/330 AD, which is 360 years. That's a time. And this battle in verse 24 is being marked right here. Okay, he's preparing, and many in this history, remember verse 14, and many shall stand up with the king of the south in between Raphia and Paneum. Trump is bringing together a unification of the other nations of the world in this history, leading to this battle where Russia is taken out. But by the time he gets here, at this battle where Russia is taken out, he's got his nations already together. But this battle in verse 24, and that's what I'm saying, is all the histories in Daniel 11 have to be brought together in this template. The Battle of Actium has got to go right here. And it's a sea battle. And it goes right where this land battle takes place, which is the Battle of Panium. And these are two Greek words. And IUM is some kind of Greek expression or term that modifies a word in some type of grammatical way. But if you just want to know what the term is, you just take the im off. And you got the Battle of Pan, I give up, and the Battle of Actium, trying to do that. Okay, that's a different story, my dear. Here, this is the midnight cry, and you have a doubling of battles, which you often have a doubling. A land battle, a sea battle. And the Battle of Pan opens up the understanding of Pan, the god of Pan. And Actium opens up the understanding of the act, because at the midnight cry, the first Sunday law is going to be enacted. And this begins the test of the image of the beast. Which is the civil, let's say the state test. This begins the test of the strong delusion. Which is the church. Okay, so there's all kinds of stuff you can do with this, but we won't. It's a matter of public record already, and there's more clarification to come into this, no doubt. But let's read verse 25. Verse 25 says, "And he shall stir up his power and courage against the king of the south with a great army." So what history would this be in? It's got to be before the Battle of Panium, because the king of the south is still in history, right? You following me? He shall stir up his power and courage against the king of the south with a great army. Who's the king of the south here? Is it Ptolemy? The Battle of Actium, who was the king of the south? My brother, who was the king of the south at the Battle of Actium?
Antony.
Ah, it was Mark Antony. You're telling me that a Roman is the king of the south. Mark Antony is a Roman. But here, according to the pioneers, though he's a Roman, which we would traditionally say is the king of the north, the pioneers understood that Mark Antony is the king of the south. By context, he's the king of the south. Why? Because he's down there infatuated with Cleopatra, right? And he's representing Egypt. So, "And he shall stir up his power and courage against Mark Antony, the king of the south, with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast the devices against him. Yea, they that feed at the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain." This is identifying that before the Battle of Panium and Actium, before the battle that marks the midnight cry, that both Russia and the United States are going to be building their military machine for the upcoming war, okay, in advance. So what's going to be going on with the economy typically in that situation? It's still going to be going up. What's that going to be doing with you and I as Seventh-day Adventists? That's going to be tempting us to think, oh, everything continues as it was from the very beginning. And when Sister White tells me as a Seventh-day Adventist that I have to have all my possessions upon the altar and in the hands of the Lord so He can dispose those possessions, because if I haven't done away with them before probation closes, then that wealth that I thought was going to stand in the banks or in the land or whatever I have is going to be used against me in the judgment. And Seventh-day Adventists that haven't been following this message and understanding what's going on, they're going to be deceived, because they're going to think everything is wonderful. The economy's doing just fine. Okay, so there's a whole bunch in here. But the king of the south here in history that's going to get defeated is Mark Antony. And it says, yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. How does Uriah Smith say that was fulfilled? He says it's fulfilled that in this battle of Actium, because of his infatuation with Cleopatra, when the battle begins, Cleopatra takes her fleet and she flees, and Mark Antony, he forgets about the war he's in and he follows after him, and that so disgusts his naval fleet that they go over to the side of Augustus Caesar and they join with him. And when Mark Antony's land forces, and I think there were 2 of them, realized what had went on out on the water, they also join the army of Augustus Caesar. So Cleopatra, his naval group, and his 2 land forces are those that had fed at his table. They had been being led by him. He was their leader. He was feeding them from his table. And they're going to destroy him because at the Battle of Actium, they're all going to desert him to such an extent that he's going to commit suicide because he realizes he's without hope. Okay, so that's pioneer understanding of the fulfillment of the Battle of Actium with Mark Antony. So what's that telling you about the king of the south in our history at the Battle of Panium? It's telling you that he has some kind of ally there. This is the second time we've seen an ally. Okay, he's going to become strong with a small people. That's how's it read in verse 15? Neither his chosen people. The arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people. They're not going to withstand either. So there's an ally there with the king of the south that's going to desert him at the Battle of Actium. They've been feeding at the portion from his table. Who is Russia propping up at this point in history? Iran. Syria. They just formed a treaty this last week between Turkey, Iran, and Russia. You heard that, right, in the news? There might have been one other player in there. It was an Islamic player if there was, but Turkey, Iran, and Russia signed some kind of alliance this week. It had to do with, that's what it was, it had to do with what they call safe zones in Syria. Okay, those 3 powers have said, these certain areas in Syria are safe zones. The United States better not bomb those areas. Okay, check it out. That's happened within the past 72 hours. So Russia has some allies that are going to flee from them at the Battle of Actium when Russia goes down. Verse 27. And both these kings' hearts, who are these kings? It's the king of the north and the king of the south. It's the United States and Russia. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Where is it that they're at a table speaking lies to each other? It's right in here. These peace treaties that follow Raphia are speaking about the peace treaties that are carried out between the king of the south and the king of the north in advance of this battle. Okay, and this is where Rome comes in. Okay, so Sister White tells us, I won't go there, about threefold union, but verse 28. How far did I get the last time I was here? I'm ending about the same place I ended last time. I'm not going to get to verse 37 to 39 as hard as I try. Okay, verse 28. Then shall he return. This is the king of the north, the United States. Okay, just defeated the king of the south, Mark Antony, Russia. Then shall he return into his land with great riches. And Uriah Smith points out that after the Battle of Actium, in 31 BC, then they went in and finished the conquering of Egypt in 30 BC, and they gathered so much booty from the conquering of Egypt that when Augustus Caesar returned to Rome, it collapsed the economy by 50%. They had so much wealth come into Rome from that battle, from that war, that their economy collapsed by 50%. Do you follow? What's the word for that?
Deflation.
Deflation. Okay, you suddenly have twice as much money available as you had the day before. if that's the right way to define it. Okay. He's going to return into his land with great riches. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. What was that? According to Uriah Smith. That's another battle. That's not the battle of Actium. What battle is that? It's the battle of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. According to Uriah Smith, there's two battles. He says there's two returnings mentioned in this verse. The first is his returning from the battle of Actium with great riches, and the second is his returning from the destruction of Jerusalem. And what is the destruction of Jerusalem a symbol of? The Sunday law. So here you have the battle of Actium at the midnight cry. It's being mentioned here in this verse, but you also have the Sunday law mentioned in this verse. Okay, and after these two battles, in verse 29, it says, at the time appointed. What's the time appointed? Time appointed is the year 330 BC. Because at the battle of Actium, he's going to rule the world for a time, which is 360 years. But in verse 28, there's two battles that are marked. The battle of Actium and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Okay, because the end is at the time appointed. And the time appointed is the year 330. And what happens in the year 330? Constantine divides the kingdom into east and west. And national apostasy is underway in the Roman Empire, typifying the Sunday law, where national apostasy is followed by national ruin. Is the destruction of the Roman Empire that begins in the year 330 a symbol of the national ruin that follows the Sunday law in the United States? Yes. It's the principle that the first Sunday law came into history in 321, and by the year 330, the Roman Empire begins to crumble. National apostasy is followed by national ruin. And then the trumpets of Revelation 8 begin to come in against Rome. And after that fourth trumpet, by the year 476, there's never another Italian that sets upon the capital of Rome. Okay, so this here, he's going to rule the world for a time. It's taking us to the Sunday law. And it's saying that between the midnight cry and the Sunday law, you have the year, the number 360, which is a symbol of Daniel chapter 3. Because in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar is going to raise up an image. And how big is that image? It's 60 cubits times 6 cubits. And it's in this history here, from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, that the image is set up on the plain of Dura, and the image of the beast test is happening in the United States and leads to the Sunday law, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into that fiery furnace. And when are they thrown into that fiery furnace? I'm about done, but if someone wants to answer, go ahead. When were they thrown into that fiery furnace? Let's look at verse 15. Of chapter 3. It says, now if you be ready at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I've made. Well, but if you worship not, you shall be cast the same what? The same hour. The hour is from the Sunday law in the United States until the universal Sunday law when human probation closes. Okay. This, from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, is the image that is 60 cubits by 6 cubits, equating to the 360, the time from the midnight cry to the division of the empire in 330, being 360. This is the image of the beast testing time that leads to the hour of the fiery furnace. And then in Daniel 11, verse 30, we're almost there. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and returned. And my sister was asking me about the ships of Kittim in one of the breaks today. And it's a very big subject. Okay, Kittim are islands that we would call the islands of Cyprus today. But those islands, which in Bible times were called Kittim, are the islands that Genseric launched his attacks against the Roman Empire from. They are a symbol, therefore, of the second trumpet. And what they accomplished in the destruction of pagan Rome was they closed off the lanes of commerce that were carried out over the Mediterranean Sea. So when you see the ships of Kittim, in connection especially with the ships of Tarshish, it's representing a trumpet power that brings down the economic structure. And what trumpet power at the end of the world brings down the economic structure of the power that's typified by pagan Rome? The power that's typified by pagan Rome is the United States, and the trumpet power that brings the economic collapse in the United States is the seventh trumpet, or the third woe. It's Islam. If the fifth trumpet is the first woe and the sixth trumpet is the second woe, then what is the seventh trumpet and the third woe? If these two are Islam, the third's got to be Islam. So in verse 30, for ships of Kittim, Islam shall come against them, therefore he shall be grieved and returned, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And this line of prophecy is ending by identifying that at the Sunday law he's going to be grieved because Islam is going to strike for the third time, and the United States is going to cease as the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. So what I'm saying in conclusion is this. This reform movement began with the book of Daniel being unsealed in 1989. And what was unsealed in that history is the reform lines in connection with the correct understanding of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And this had been typified by the understanding of the first angel's message of William Miller. Both of those represent the first seal for each of their respective reform line histories. In the Millerite history, what brings to perfection that message of the judgment hour was the 7th seal, the midnight cry message that was put in place by Samuel Snow that brought the perfection of the prediction of 1843 to perfection by identifying as October 22nd, 1844. Therefore, when we get to the conclusion of this reform history, we should once again see Jesus bringing light upon the very message that he opened up in 1989 at the time of the end. And the light that he opened up was an understanding of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 in connection with an understanding of the application, the methodology of line upon line. In the Millerite history, he held his hand over a mistake in some of the figures on that chart. It was a singular mistake. It was the fullness of the year mistake. That mistake was typifying Daniel 11 verse 10, where we were led to understand that when the king of the south was swept away in 1989, that it identified that Russia was off the scene of prophetic history. But as of December of last year, which is not very long ago, the Lord has removed his hand from that understanding. And we're now seeing that Russia is part of the scenario of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And in agreement with the definition of prophecy that has been put in place in this movement from the very beginning, historical events were set before the people, and prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to the close of this earth's history. In agreement with that, at the very time when the Lord is removing his hand from the misunderstanding that Russia was the king of the south, the very history that you would expect to see happening to fulfill the understanding that's coming to light about the last president of the United States and the struggle between the United States and Russia that represents the Third World War is taking place on a daily basis, and no one can deny it. So there, without a doubt, there is clarifications and corrections that will need to be made about what I have taught here on this Sabbath. There is more to come. I am positive about that. But I am also positive that when we look at the history of Samuel Snow in the logic of the seven thunders, and we watch the development of the midnight cry message as represented by the history of Samuel Snow, that we're now at the point of time to where May 2nd is about to take place. And on May 2nd, 1844, Samuel Snow put his midnight cry message, he published it in advance of his presentation of that message spoken at the Boston Tabernacle on July 21st. What is coming to light in Daniel 11, period, the whole chapter of Daniel 11, is about to be put into a publication that will parallel, and I'm not saying that because I know that it's going to be done. I'm saying that based upon God's prophetic word never fulfilling, never failing. That's the next waymark. It's going to be put into the public record. Maybe it already has been, in the sense that the studies that have been coming out identifying these verses are already available. They simply need some rough edges rounded off and a little bit of, movement here and movement there. But that, May 2nd, was the prediction that comes before midnight. So without having that publication in the public arena yet, what we do have, if we're willing to see it, is we already know what the prediction before midnight is. The prediction before midnight that we're going to have to proclaim, that we are proclaiming in an offhanded way through the internet at this time, is that Russia is about to strike the United States and prevail. And at that time, it's going to create a religious crisis around planet Earth. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church, to protect itself, as it did in World War I and World War II and other times of crisis, is going to reach out to the government of the United States and secure some kind of legal arrangement that not only protects them, they will think, but places those that have been giving this prediction into legal jeopardy with the laws of the land. That's what's just ahead of us. And I don't think we get the privilege to participate in that glorious work if we do not know how to make this message our own in order to present it, but perhaps more importantly, if we do not bring our life into agreement with the reality that the Battle of Raphia is identifying where our probation closes for eternity, and if you and I don't have a character prepared for the seal of God before that battle, we will be lost. And the light that we have to come up to is not simply the intellectual understanding of prophecy. It's the entire light that has been given to us through the Bible and spirit of prophecy. Whether it's dress reform, health reform, which dress reform is part of, or country living, or sanctified stewardship, or all the various reforms that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was given through the ministry of Ellen White and that was also set forth in the Bible. If we don't have that experience, we will have failed to meet the high calling that we have to meet if we're going to be among that number that is the ensign that gets lifted up as the church triumphant is being brought in to the history at the end of the world. Okay, so it's not simply about the intellectual understanding of this message. It's where you and I are in our own experience with Christ. And if I had to choose one or the other, I wouldn't choose either. But the sealing is a settling into the truth both intellectually and spiritually, so that we cannot be moved when midnight arrives. So we have to have them both. Sister White says thoughts and feelings, intellectual, spiritual. Thoughts and feelings combined go to make up moral character. She also says, if our thoughts are right, our feelings will be right. So the purpose of prophecy is to give us the intellectual understanding that will make our thoughts right, because if our thoughts are right, our feelings will be right, and we will have a character that is perfected for the shaking. Okay, so you can't throw away that prophetic message. But if you and I are fooling ourselves that all we have to do is come up with the human understanding of this message, the intellectual, then it's the greatest of deception. Okay. So I realize that this is pretty much a repeat of the last time that I was here, but this message, you don't think so? No. Okay, well, I don't know, so I'm just feeling that way. But I don't, pardon me?
No, I mean, there's similarities.
Yeah, but I'm not making an apology. I'm saying I don't care. I have my past experience. And my past experience tells me this, that for the first 5 or plus years that I presented the prophetic message personally, it was Daniel 11, 40-45 in the Reform lines, over and over and over again, where I could do the presentations in my sleep. That was the beginning of this work. So I'm having a hunch that this message that's opened up is a message that's going to have to be repeated over and over again until it settles into God's people, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. Shall we pray?